During the Regency era, dowry was an important part of the marriage. A woman's personality and reputation mattered, but her fortune could strongly influence her marriage prospects. A wealthy woman had more choices, while a woman with little money had fewer. In Pride and Prejudice, the Bennet sisters grew up in a comfortable household. Their father, Mr. Bennet, owned Longbourn Estate, had servants, and lived as a member of the rural middle class. The family was respectable, but they were not wealthy. Because of the inheritance rules, the sisters could not inherit Longbourn after their father's death, leaving marriage as one of their main paths to financial security. So, how much dowry did the Bennet sisters bring into the marriage market? The answer is surprisingly modest. It's £1,000 each. Altogether, the five sisters were expected to inherit £5,000, which would be divided equally among them after their mother's death. But this money was not something Mr. Bennet had saved for his daughters during his lifetime. In fact, it was Mrs. Bennet's marriage portion. When Mr. and Mrs. Bennet married, she brought £5,000 into the marriage. Under the customs of the time, that money became part of the family's finances, but it was settled so that it would eventually pass to her children. Since there were 5 daughters, each would receive about £1,000.
The surprising part is that this was almost all they had. Mr. Bennet earned around £2,000 a year from the Longbourn estate. That was a comfortable income and allowed the family to live as respectable members of the landed gentry. They had servants, a carriage, and a pleasant country house. However, Jane Austen tells us that Mr. Bennet made one very costly mistake. When he first married, both he and his wife expected they would eventually have a son. That son would inherit Longbourn, so Mr. Bennet did not think it necessary to save a large fortune for future daughters. As the years passed and 5 daughters were born, but no son, the situation became more serious. Yet by then, it was too late. Mr. Bennet admitted that he had never managed to save enough money to increase his daughters' fortunes. If he had set aside even a small amount each year from his £2,000 annual income, the Bennet sisters could have entered society with much larger dowries. Instead, they remained dependent almost entirely on their mother's original £5,000. That meant each daughter's fortune was only £1,000. At first glance, that sounds like a respectable sum, and for many ordinary families, it certainly was. It meant the sisters were not completely penniless. But in Regency society, £1,000 was considered a modest fortune, especially for daughters of the landed gentry.
To see why, compare it with the fortunes of the men around them. Mr. Bingley possessed a fortune of about £100,000. Mr. Darcy was even wealthier. His famous £10,000 a year was not his total wealth, it was his annual income from his estates. His land and investments were worth far more than that. This is an important distinction. The Bennet sisters' £1,000 was a personal fortune, a fixed amount of capital they were expected to inherit. Mr. Darcy's £10,000 was yearly income, generated every single year by his estates. His total fortune was many times larger than the Bennet sisters' combined inheritance. So while £1,000 could provide a small investment income and some financial security, it was nowhere near enough to support the lifestyle of a wealthy gentlewoman on its own. Men like Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley had choices. Because they were already wealthy, they could easily have married women with much larger fortunes than the Bennet sisters. Across England, there were heiresses who brought £10,000, £20,000, or even £30,000 into marriage. From a purely financial perspective, those women would have been far more advantageous matches. There was nothing about the Bennet sisters' dowries that would attract men like Darcy or Bingley. If either gentleman chose one of them, it would be despite their modest fortunes, not because of them. Now we come to one of the most interesting questions. Once the Bennet sisters married,
What actually happened to their £1,000 dowries? Did the money still belong to them, or did it become their husband's money? The answer lies in a legal principle called coverture. Under the laws of Regency England, a married woman had very limited legal independence. Once she married, her legal identity was largely absorbed into her husband's. In most cases, a husband gained control over his wife's personal property, including money, unless special legal arrangements had been made before the wedding. These arrangements were known as marriage settlements. So, what does this mean for Jane and Elizabeth? Did Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy actually take their £1,000 dowries? Jane Austen never tells us whether marriage settlements were drawn up for either marriage. Because of that, we cannot say for certain exactly how their fortunes were handled. However, we can make one observation. Mr. Bingley and Darcy were already extremely wealthy. Jane and Elizabeth's £1,000 dowry would have made almost no difference to either man's financial position. In fact, both gentlemen had every opportunity to marry wealthy heiresses with fortunes 10 or 20 times larger than those of the Bennet sisters. Yet they chose Jane and Elizabeth because they loved them and admired them, not because of their money. Whether Darcy and Bingley legally controlled the money or not, they did not need it. The situation was very different for men who were not wealthy, and that brings us to the Bennet sister whose marriage was the most financially uncertain. We need to look at Lydia Bennet and George Wickham. The Bennet sister, whose £1,000 likely mattered the most, Lydia Bennet. George Wickham was not a wealthy gentleman. Although he was charming and handsome, he had a long history of poor financial decisions. Throughout the novel, we learn that he accumulated debts, spent money carelessly, and repeatedly looked for wealthy women to solve his financial problems. He eventually ran away with Lydia. In the end, it was Mr. Darcy who stepped in. Darcy secretly paid Wickham's debts and negotiated a settlement that persuaded him to marry Lydia, saving the Bennet family's reputation. But the marriage itself did not solve their financial problems. Jane Austen tells us that Wickham continued his irresponsible habits. He changed jobs several times, struggled with money, and the couple never became financially stable. Lydia and Wickham frequently hoped for financial help from their wealthier relatives. Even after the novel ends, they often visited Pemberley and Bingley's estate, and they regularly depended on the kindness of Elizabeth and Jane. The novel never tells us exactly when Lydia received her £1,000, or precisely how it was used, but it's safe to assume that Wickham spent it paying debts, supporting their household, or on something else. Let me know in the comments section what do you think about it, and subscribe for more videos like this. Thanks for watching.